Welcome to Scott Bryson Beyond the Service. Tonight I have a big treat for everybody. Mr. Ken Valentine. He's an author, a retired Secret Service agent, of course, and a motivational speaker. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am to introduce you guys to him tonight. Ken, I know you're a busy man. Thanks for taking the time to be here.
Oh, Scott, it's my pleasure. I'm so glad to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
You're quite welcome. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the interview, you mind telling the audience whatever you want them to know about you, where you're from, or family, or
Yeah,
background Secret Service?
you bet. Yeah, I'm Ken Valentine. I retired from the Secret Service after 24 years, and I guess that's important. But next week I'm going to celebrate 33 years of marriage. So that was first, and came after the career too. So that's a little more important in my hierarchy. But Sanders blessed me with 33 years of marriage coming up. And we've got 5 kids that we raised during that 24-year Secret Service career. And I don't know how many times we moved, but I know I served with 3 different sitting presidents on the President's Detail, visited about 74 countries. And so I loved that career and retired in 2020. Moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and so I do a variety of stuff now. I advise on corporate security and operational risk, and I got a couple of books out there. I'm on 3 different boards of directors, and I get out and speak a bunch too. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
You sound like a pretty busy man. So before we kind of just dive right into the questions part of this thing that I want to talk about with you, we were talking off camera just a minute ago, and about our time together on PPD, which everybody is probably used to me saying PPD, but it's Presidential Protective Division. Do you want to talk about your career, like where you kind of started, just very Cliff Note version, phase 1, where you started and how you got to the detail, and then some promotions and things like that? Because I remember at the end of your career and close to the end of mine, I started to go to work for you over at Dignitary Protective Division, if I have that correct in my mind. But then you retired on me, so that didn't work. So why don't you tell the folks kind of a little bit about your career, where you started and how you got to the detail and all that good stuff?
Yeah. Well, I graduated from law school in '92 and bounced around with different jobs and got married. And my wife and I are living in Tennessee. And I thought I had the law enforcement thing out of my system after a short stint with a department in Mississippi. And I went to work for State Farm Insurance, did that for a couple of years. And finally, the Secret Service hired me in '96. And they sent me to Louisville, Kentucky. So I spent the first 4 years of my career there. The ebb and flow of the time on the job before you get to go to the President's Detail was moving downward. And so I ended up going to the President's Detail with just 4 years on the job. And so in 2000, I transferred to D.C., and it was the last year of President Bill Clinton's term. And so I was there with him for a year, and then the first 4 years of George W. Bush. And that rounded out what then was a 5-year PPD career. In fact, the cover of my first book, Cheating Death, is my last day on the detail. It was the inauguration of Bush, and it's me and Glenn Kessler out there walking beside the car. But I left there, and I had applied for a fellowship on Capitol Hill, and I, lo and behold, got it. And I went up there and advised Senator Orrin Hatch on the Senate Judiciary Committee on crime and criminal justice issues. Sorry. And I did that for 2 years. We can talk more about that in a bit, because it had a large play toward my future, just doing that 2-year stint on Capitol Hill. Uh-huh. I bounced out of D.C. Thought I'd seen it all, done it all, and we were ready to get back south. And so we moved to Oxford, Mississippi, thinking that we were done and we'll just be put out to pasture there. And I think the Lord had a different plan. I was certain that He wanted us to move to Oxford, and I just never heard that we were supposed to stay there forever. And that was my plan. The Lord had other plans, and so in early '09, I was sent back to D.C. I was promoted back to the President's Detail, and I was there for about 5 years. I was in the Joint Operation Command Center. I did the access control at the White House, and then I was a shift leader for 2 years and 7 months, and loved every bit of that. I'd still be doing that if they'd have let me do that. But you got to bounce out. So, like a broken record, I went back to congressional affairs. I was the ASAC there in D.C. and oversaw that program that I'd been under when I was on Senate Judiciary Committee. Bounced out again to the field, this time to Philadelphia as an ASAC 15 up in Philadelphia, just in time to inherit the Pope's visit for when he went to Philadelphia. And then I bounced out to Oklahoma City as the SAC for a couple of years, and then back to D.C. To DPD as the SAC there. And that's where I retired in 2020, and I'm sorry we didn't get to work together there as well.
Well, no, listen, everything happens for a reason. I think, trying to get my timelines down right, because I had left PPD and gone to Hawaii. I took a lateral 14 over to Hawaii. I was going to try to check that box and come back, and my ultimate goal was to be a 15 ASAC on the detail, and it just didn't work out, which is fine. But I was like, okay, how do I get back to DC and work? I like being operational. Desk jobs are
me too.
Are like, so I like being operational. So I was trying to figure out how to get my foot back in the door. And I do remember talking to you briefly. And I was like, oh crap, he retired. So I was happy for you, but sad for me, because as you well know, I'm not going to say there's necessarily nepotism involved on all these things, but it does. You have to have that push pull, with the service. And so I know some of those spots some spots are more competitive than others. And I know that DPD spot would have been competitive. So I was going to try to leverage some, I don't know, weight, however you want to say it.
Some brotherly goodwill.
Yes, goodwill. Professional courtesy when you get pulled over by the cop. You said something a minute ago that made me think, because I was a 14 on PPD as a small detail leader for Eric Trump in 17 and 18. That was a super hard assignment. I always argued that a 14 shift leader was the hardest job on PPD the Secret Service has to offer. I don't know if you agree with that, but you did it for a long time. I was in New York for 15 months, and I thought I was going to die because I loved Eric and the Trump family, don't get me wrong, but it's just a hard assignment with all the admin and the travel. Do you want to speak a few minutes on, try to give the people a glimpse into, because all they see on TV is the movies, and everybody's always doing the high-speed, sexy stuff, but no one knows about all the other stuff that goes on.
I'd always heard that too, that the shift leader is the hardest job in the Secret Service, and it's got this 1 year burnout rate that people rarely, make it to 1 year, and certainly not past that. And I did not find that to be true. I know it's hard, but I like doing hard things, and I actually loved being the shift leader. The access control job was actually harder to me because you didn't travel. It was late nights and weekends at the White House. It seemed like it was just nonstop. I know I added them up because we had an event at the White House that I was in charge of and responsible for. And for one event, I added them up because it was getting so ridiculous. 500 emails about one event. And that's just the way we were back then. And that was the technology high-speed approach to that. And they changed it since then and made it a little more user-friendly. But being the shift leader meant that you were in charge of, let's say, 20 agents, and you really kind of run their life. I mean, but you're doing their schedule. You're deciding who's going on what trip. You're deciding who gets what advance, which is part of your, building your resume toward bigger and better things. Yeah. And maybe more importantly than both of those, you're kind of ensuring their quality or lack of quality of life during their time on a president's detail. And so that schedule was something that I've been over backwards and 3 times on Sundays trying to make the schedule user friendly for everybody and make sure that people got what they wanted, that if they were looking for opportunities to go places and do things, that they got them. If they were ready for travel or not ready for travel, that they got what they were looking for. And, if I had to have a hard conversation with somebody, I did. Yeah. But most of the time it was good news stories that I got you what you wanted, got you what you asked for, and and that was the real pleasure in it for me, was taking care of people and
Yeah.
making sure that that their quality of life could be at some level good, even though you're in a very difficult position and a tough job with a lot of travel.
Yeah. Well, I remember my time on PPD as a worker bee was amazing. I had, I think, three different shift leaders. I think I can't remember because I did some cat time and Andy card time. So I think I had three different shift leaders, and Glenn Kessler, the guy that's on the cover of the book with you, was my last shift leader. And they were all good, but
Yeah,
man, Glenn was awesome, and
yeah.
he was like a mastermind with that schedule, and it could make or your 14 will make or break your life. I mean, it's like the work life balance is no joke.
It seemed like some people were really good with the operational aspect of the job, and that was clearly important. You're in charge of somebody's life and making sure that you know, thwart any effort to kill them. That's the job. So that was critically important, that you understood and were able to manage the operational tactical aspects of the job. But underneath all that was the admin. And if you've got five tired agents all out there working who you shortchanged into working that day, which means they worked until 10 o'clock. You sent them home and they had to be back at 6 o'clock. I mean, you keep doing that to people and they get worn out.
Yeah.
They're not getting their workouts. They're not getting to eat and sleep and do all that stuff. And so I made it my mission to ensure that people were taken care of to the best of my ability to take care of them. And I think that paid off. That certainly gave me a lot of satisfaction when I saw people thriving.
Yeah, I think, and I can say this with certainty because I tried to do the same thing too, and I'm sure you were like me, like work for bosses that you like, I don't want to do that, and you throw that away, and then you work for this guy and you put it in your toolbox because it's good. I think, you know, I know you're a man of faith, and I think that played heavily into your conscience. You're trying to do the right thing for people. I'd like to think it was what was my moral compass. It's like not everybody's got that, and that doesn't mean everybody's a bad guy, but you could just tell that sometimes there was just like I almost don't care. You know what I mean? You could always tell when a guy or a female was putting in the extra effort to try to make. I mean, listen, the show goes on, right? You're going to have to miss some things. That's the nature of the beast. But we're not going to miss it just to miss it, right? And you could tell when a person was putting forth a little bit different effort.
Yeah, I really looked at my shift as like family, and we
Mm-hmm.
would do cookouts. We we tried to have fun on the side when we could, even at training. When we went into fourth shift training, we'd try to make it fun and
Yeah,
do some team exercises and some things that built trust and all that. But I loved them,
yeah,
and that was the thing, is I loved every one of them, and I would give them the shirt off my back and do whatever I had to do to take care of them to the best of my ability. And yeah, there were a couple of times when I had to call one of them and say, there's no way for me to get you what you're asking for this week, but on the next schedule, I'm going to try to
yeah,
you'll be first. I'll try to take care of you
yeah,
first. And you make people's day, and sometimes you have to ruin people's day. And
yeah,
but you know what? That sounds like family to me. You
yeah,
take care of them when you can, and love them all the time, and that's kind of the way I went about it.
yeah. That's good. I can remember riding to work with Glenn that last year I was on the detail. We would meet up and they called it the suck truck. I don't know if that's what you guys referred to it as. But the shift leader had the G ride. Everybody else had POVs. So we'd meet at the Target parking lot in Gainesville, and whoever lived out there could. It was just the fact that he was willing to commute in and be the driver, especially on midnight. You're the boss and you're driving everybody to work. That meant a lot to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Glenn's a great guy. He's still doing great and still doing all that stuff. I don't think I ever saw anyone. He and I did a lot of advances together, and he's still one of the finest advance agents I've
Oh,
ever seen.
yeah,
Just methodical, thoughtful,
yeah.
creative, and he knew how to bring it together.
No, he's really good. Well, I'm sure you were too. We didn't. I'm sorry that we didn't get. I mean, our paths crossed, but we didn't really get to work together a ton. But I know I would have enjoyed working for you just the same. Now let's transition just for a second into a part of your career that I know nothing about. And let me just before I say that, let me just say this: the reason I said that the 14 I feel like the 14 on the details the hardest is because I did it as a small detail leader, and I guess I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder because the shift leaders I felt like I was the redheaded stepchild, so to speak. And no one ever said it, but it's just a vibe you got sometimes. Um, I think being in DC, you've got the ops right there, right? But like I was in New York and I had literally no help. I had no admin, no nothing. So I think that's probably what made mine feel so much harder. You know what I mean?
No doubt, and I know from talking to Al Story that you're out of sight, out of mind, and so you you get out there on one of these details where there's not a lot of support, and you can feel like you're all alone and like you're having to shoulder the entire mission. And I felt that. I mean, I did an advance for the National Security Advisor in London, where we were told you get no police support. We had an armored limo and one contract embassy person who was helping me, and that was it. And we had a separate hotel, a separate RON, all separate motorcade routes. I mean, it was an enormous job, just logistics, and I just felt like nobody is supporting me in this. And if I screw it up, there's no one to blame and no one to thank here, but it's all on me. And I'm sure you felt that same way, where you're in New York doing your own thing, and out of you kind of out of from under the nose of all the DC entities that would normally be seeing you and feeling your presence. But I know you did a great job. I know Al Story did too, and
Man,
it's a hard job.
Al had his hands full. I mean, I was busy, but that brother was humping. Um, what I was going to say, and I won't belabor the point anymore, but like, you said you had a shift of 20 or whatever it was. Those are your people. And that, I think that was another component to what we had to deal with. We didn't have a shift, or I built it up to about 50%. But I had temps the whole time, and even when I was fully staffed, I still had temps. So, it's hard. I didn't really understand at the time, like, well, I have a 2-week assignment. Why can't the shift leader give me a dude for 2 weeks? Or why can't CSU send me a guy for 2 weeks? But then when I came back and I ran CSU for a year, I was like, oh, sending the guy for 2 weeks is hard. You know what I mean? So my schedule would look like a Ouija board, because I might have Ken Valentine for 2 weeks and I'd get Scott Bryson for 1 week, and then he had to get replaced. It was just, a 16-person schedule turned into like a 40-man schedule very quickly. And that was the part that was just maniacal.
Yeah, I never felt like we had more people than we needed. I always felt like you were running a little thin, and I always heard that term, doing more with less. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, we're getting the job done with what we've got, and sometimes, especially an overseas mission, you get what you get. You'll get as many post changers as fit on a car plane, and you'll get the advanced personnel that they figured you might need before you got there, and then you hit the ground and realize, hey, this is a lot bigger deal than we thought it was. But it's really too late to spin up more people and all that. But in retrospect, that was a lot of the fun of the job, was just embrace the suck and get it done, and that's what we did. Just get her done.
It was by far I enjoyed my CAT time. I was on CAT for 3 years, but I think my PPD time, especially when I was a senior guy, I went post satellite. I was working for Glenn and had a good shift. Man, some good days. Hard days, but good days, good memories. That's what bonds you together, is the hard times. But hey, so talk to the people a little bit, and I want to know this too, because I don't know much about it. Your time up at Capitol Hill, that sounds pretty interesting. What were you doing up there? Because a lot of people don't understand, that these federal agencies have people up there. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, most federal law enforcement agencies have what they call a detailee program, and the FBI had them, Coast Guard had them. I think all the law enforcement agencies had them. Some more than others, and Secret Service had 2 or 3, I think, while I was there. Oddly enough, Glenn Kessler and I went up at the same time. We were both on the Senate side, and he was in the personal office of Senator Grassley. I got assigned for Lord knows why, but I got assigned to Senate Judiciary Committee, and within the committee, I was assigned to Senator Hatch. And so you're like free labor for them. You're supposed to come in with some know-how and some information that they can find useful. and I had the law degree, so that was sort of a feather in my cap compared to some who went up there. But he put me to work. I was writing letters to constituents. I was writing speeches for him and advising him on crime and criminal justice issues before the committee. And probably the greatest thing that happened, I was such a village idiot. I did not know or understand. Nobody said a word, and I didn't figure it out on my own. But when they're in recess, that's when you're supposed to take your leave. And I show up for work on a Monday during recess, and there's nobody there. We got an intern at the front desk, and that's it. All the other staffers are gone. And that week, Ed Smart from Utah walked in. He didn't know it was recess either, but his daughter Elizabeth had been abducted from their home out in Utah, and Elizabeth was kidnapped and being held against her will and raped and taken advantage of for about 11 months, I believe, and finally returned to her family. And Ed was on fire. He was still angry about the state of the laws in our country and wanted to see what he could do about it. Well, guess who's the only idiot in the office to talk to him was me, and I was probably the right guy to talk to. But after about 4 hours of talking with him in the conference room, I said, Mr. Smart, I need to tell you something. I am not a Harvard, Capitol Hill lawyer kind of guy. I am a Secret Service agent who's doing a fellowship up here, and I just got here a few weeks ago. So I said, look, you may think you got the wrong guy, but let me tell you this. I'm a Secret Service agent, and I don't know how to fix what you're talking about is broken, but we'll figure it out, and we will get it done.
Yeah.
And a year and a half later, after banging heads with all these Capitol Hill, lawyerly types and, skinning my knees and running into walls and doing all the wrong stuff, we're in the Rose Garden signing the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act into law. And it changed the complexity of sex offender laws in the United States. And instead of every state just kind of figured out and do it on their own, we put together a little mantle that if they didn't comply, then we took away their federal funding.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, they all wanted to comply after that and make it a felony to not report to your parole officer when you're a sex offender. And we talked about ankle bracelets and all this kind of stuff. And John Walsh was so happy, and we worked with John and Reve Walsh, who founded the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, and their attorneys were helpful in the process of telling us what we need to include in this bill. And John was so grateful. The people that he works with kept up with me over the years. And so when I moved back to Oxford, Mississippi, and I went out with the marshals on Operation Falcon, I put my handcuffs on the first sex offender we rounded up in that operation. And I called back to D.C. to those guys, and I said, hey, I wrote the law, and now I get to go out and enforce it, and it's the best of both worlds. And so when I retired, John called. It was like 10 o'clock one night, and he said, I understand you just retired. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, I'm nominating you for the board of directors tomorrow. I said, well, I may want to talk to some people about that. And he said, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. And so he did. And I've been on that board at the National Center for Missing Exploited Children for 5 years now, and just love the engagement, love the mission. It's a lot like the Secret Service. It's a no-fail mission. We really have to succeed. And that's the way people look at it, with just passion and energy, and there is no tomorrow. We got to do this today.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I was watching recently the interview with Sean Ryan did with Tim Tebow. I don't know if you caught that one. I haven't finished it yet, but man, it's gut wrenching. And there's a lot of that stuff I don't understand, as far as like the nuance with the Can you explain for the audience? Because I don't know if I understand ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, because I was a part of that when I was 14 in Hawaii. We, believe it or not, there's bad people everywhere. I can remember going a couple of times. We did it like twice a year. We'd go over to Maui. I know everybody feels sorry for me. I had to go to Maui and do one of these pedo roundups. But like, we'd get 5 or 6 guys, which is not a lot on a weekend, but it's mostly people that are on vacation. There's locals too, but it was a mixture of locals and some people on vacation, just up to just like no good. Can you Can you explain, because I'd like to understand a little bit better too, like the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, how does that exactly work?
Yeah, yeah. Well, who would have thought 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago that sex offenders who
Mm,
just seemed like despicable, disgusting people would be your neighbor next door. I mean,
mm,
and it's gotten so bad that they guarantee you there's someone in your neighborhood who's viewing or disseminating. We used to call it child porn. Now we call it child sexual abuse material, or
mhm,
CSAM,
mhm,
and it's everywhere. Kids are being abused and exploited all over the place, and a
mhm,
lot of it's coming from overseas. But it all has a cyber nexus because it's all done over the internet now, and then they use the internet to lure kids to meet up with them, and that's when it gets physical. But
mhm,
the and so because this has morphed and grown and just gotten out of control, almost every law enforcement agency out there has a piece of the pie,
mhm,
and very few, there's little coordination to that. In fact, when John and Reve Walsh's son was kidnapped and then murdered, there was nobody to call to complain about that. It's a kidnapping. It's a possibly a runaway child, and of course they got told at the police department, well, you need to file a report and we'll get back to you. And he tried to call the FBI, and they're like, man, we don't have jurisdiction over that. And he just stonewalled everywhere he went, and it frustrated them so badly. He still gets angry. He'll tear up about it. He'll cuss his brains out over it. And they formed the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children out of the trunk of their car
mm,
because there was just nowhere for them to turn to try to help find their son Adam, who they were very sure had been kidnapped from a store that she was in. And so now you've got all these law enforcement agencies that are doing their best to get involved and to try to prevent, but then to uncover and round up bad guys to try to help kids. But the ICACs are these, those are group efforts, and then you'll have task forces that are put together either by state, local, federal agencies. But even when I was in Oklahoma, we had an electronic crimes task force, and
mhm,
it was designed as a fraud task force.
mhm,
And I said, hey, I don't really care about fraud. I mean, I wish it didn't happen, but the cost of a child in their life is so much worse to me than even, $1 million worth of fraud. Go after the sex offenders. Let's find them, let's polygraph them, and let's put them in jail. And that's what we did. I mean, we went after sex offenders every day
mhm,
because I had the cover of this electronic crimes task force, and it was a murky enough, constitution there for that we used it as the way to go about sex offenders. But it's a patchwork quilt, and all
mm,
these different agencies now. ICE is and Homeland Security investigations very involved
mhm,
in the effort to find sex offenders, to save kids. The marshals in the Adam Walsh Act, we specifically gave the marshals power and authority and funding to go after sex offenders. So everyone's getting involved in it. Unfortunately, it's not as coordinated as it could be, but the
mhm.
National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is that one place. It is the national clearinghouse for all things that relate to child crimes against children. And so whether you're looking at you've arrested somebody and they seem to have some weird stuff on their computer, and it turns out to be sexual in nature with kids. Well, the National Center works with law enforcement on a hourly basis, 24/7, 365, to review these videos, photos, all these instances of child exploitation, and see if they can't get to the bottom of it. A lot of times they're sent videos by people who find them on the dark web or wherever, and they catalog these things and work through them, and so they can say, oh yeah, that's a known video. That child is now safe, and the perp has already been convicted. Or they can say that's a new video, and we got to do what we can. And so they scour those videos looking for clues that they can then turn around and give to law enforcement to try to go out and catch bad guys and save kids.
It's unbelievable that we have to actually have people that dedicated to do that, but it's an ugly world. And I saw it when I was in Hawaii. I was 14 running investigation inside the house, and ECTF fell under me and all that stuff, ICAC and everything, and I got involved with that. So I don't want to look at the images, you know what I mean? Like somebody's got to do that. And my heart goes out to these investigators and these officers who sit there and look at all this stuff. I've seen some images that I can't unsee, and that's just disturbing. So I'm definitely not cut out for that. I'm a big softy. I would be more than happy to go hands-on and throw them on the ground and handcuff them. But it's like looking at that stuff, it just takes a special person to do that. And then when I was in Wilmington, we had a small office, but there was one guy that did that. And I know it's a group effort, but like you said, it's not quite as coordinated as I wish it was. And I'm hoping that, some of these private foundations are doing good too, right? Like Tim Tebow was talking about it with Sean Ryan, and then Sean's had a couple of guys on his podcast that are kind of like hackers or whatever, and they're infiltrating these dudes' networks. It's really bad.
There are some really great guys, a lot of former military operators that are going after sex offenders, and unfortunately, law enforcement just doesn't have the resources in terms of personnel often to dedicate people to doing this, and so they'll do a big op every year or every 6 months or something like that, or they'll dedicate one officer if it's a smaller department to internet crimes against kids. But it's a 24/7, 365 problem, and it really takes a bigger effort. And so thankfully there are guys like Jeff Teagues, Tim Tebow. There's one other guy, and I'll think of his name in a minute. But man, they are out there dedicated to this and making a difference. And so thank God for people who are willing to make that their calling and go after them.
Yeah. Are you thinking about Victor Marks?
No, man, I can picture him and I can't think of his name. But I will. He's on LinkedIn all the time,
well,
on Instagram.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Listen, there's some good people doing some good things. I mean, there's a lot of bad in the world. There's still some good. So speaking of some good, as we kind of wrap this thing up, I know your faith is important to you, just like mine is to me. Would you like to share some of the things that maybe helped you as a Secret Service agent remain, steadfast in your relationship with your wife and your family and with God?
Yeah. Faith is number one for me, and I think if it doesn't occupy that number one space in your heart, then it's easy for it to get crowded out and then find its way out of your heart. So for me, it's been an intentional effort to keep it number one, and staying in the Word has been critical to me. I think just trying to put that little time in. A lot of times it's just a couple of minutes. I mean, I know when I was getting up at 3:30 in the morning and heading into DC, it's tough to carve out any more time, get up even earlier to do that. But hey, God never said it's got to be perfect. I think direction beats perfection. And so when we're intentional about staying in the Word, and maybe it's not perfect, but it is directional, I think He knows the difference, and that's good for the heart that wants to stay pure. And so also being, tied with a wife who supports me in that way, and knows how important the your spiritual life is, that would encourage me in that way. And so Sandra has been biggest fan and advocate, especially during hard times. You find yourself grumpy and down, and it's like, how's the quiet time? Have you been in the Word lately, and making sure that you're putting some time in with the Lord? It's, I tell people it's a relationship, and it's got to be fed, and it's got to be nurtured, or it's not a relationship. So for me, being plugged into a local church has been important. And look, there were plenty of months where I didn't darken the inside of a church. We were gone every Sunday. We were, working or gone. And so my wife's taking the kids by herself, but and then I would show back up, when I could. But just being plugged in and having people look after you, encourage you. I've got a mentor, a guy that latched on to me at one point. His name's Joe Hamlet. I write about him in the various books, and Joe pours into me and he checks up on me, and we have an open accountability deal where he can ask me anything at any time. And hey, knowing that makes a difference. And so I think I look at things differently, knowing that it's almost like a fitness test. If you're going to be tested every quarter in your fitness, well, you might get up and go for that run even when you don't feel like it. Yeah. And so just the reminder, the accountability, the encouragement to stay in the Word, stay faithful. And God is faithful. I mean, God has been so good to us. We don't deserve it, and yet He has been more than crazy generous to us. And so we've got every reason to love Him back. And that's been our experience, and that's my relationship. And now I've got even more time to pour into it. And so I read a book recently talking about prayer, and it described getting in the Word and praying as wasting time with God. And it was kind of a funny way to say that, but their point was that to the outside, it might look like a big waste of time, but God doesn't see it that way. And so I try to waste as much time as possible with God.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Ken. I know you had an amazing career and you're doing amazing things now. But none of it's worth anything if you don't have a relationship with the Lord. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to be preachy because that doesn't usually work. I just want to show love because Jesus is love. And I want to show that. And that's what I'm trying to do. I know that all of my videos are, not everybody likes what I'm talking about, just like with you. I understand that. I'm not for everybody. That's okay. But I'm going to be me because God's been faithful to me. Just like He has to everybody. And I just feel like it's my duty, not only my duty, but I want to. Like I want to help people. And I know it sounds super cliche, but I really want to help people. And I really appreciate people like you coming on, taking time out of your busy schedule to share some stuff with us, with the rest of the world. And I really hope the best for you. I know God's got His hand on you, and I can't wait to see what the future brings for you.
Oh, thank you, brother. I appreciate everything you're doing. I love your videos and the advice. And sometimes it's, best advice, when you check into a hotel, and other times it's, hey, let's just have a little scripture reading. And so I appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing it. Good direction. And so appreciate all of that.
Ken, thanks so much, buddy.
You bet. Take care now.